All right. Project Herpetoculture number 35. Philip Leeds here, enjoying a hilariously named alcoholic beverage, Montucky cold snack. Shout out to the new sponsor. No, is Roy Arthur Blodgett of Wellspring Herpetoculture, and we have a Patreon, and which is patreon.com/Project Herpetoculture. Support us there. It means a lot if you're able to. It helps us try to realize some of our ambitions for the show and what we want to do in this world. Also, here's where the little snippet for our sponsors is going to go. It's a cue to Charlie, who's the legend, the man, the myth, the legend. And then shout out to Dylan, the GOAT at the Animals at Home podcast and Animals at Home network, for hosting our show. And today is going to be a little bit different because today's a solo show just between Roy and myself. And we wanted to make this episode a solo one because, we'll probably do this from time to time where we feel like we need sort of like a decompression or a disc defragmentation or whatever after all of the episodes and interviews that we've done up until this point. Because I feel like we kind of end up in these positions where there's a lot to talk about and we kind of have a lot bouncing around in our minds. And I feel like it's worth kind of talking about some of that stuff. So before we maybe get into some of the topics that at least are on my mind, and I know that there are going to be some on Roy's mind as well, I just give like a sort of like a mild, brief personal shop update, which is the first Euromastix ornata eggs are on the ground here. I had a couple of Moroccans lay eggs kind of really off season over the deep parts of the winter. One of which has already hatched, oddly. So I've got some baby Moroccans running around, which is awesome. I love those little bastards. And I'm actually a little grateful that they were laid before everything else because Moroccans are really aggressive as babies, like with each other. They hate each other with a fiery passion from hell. And getting the opportunity to have enough space that's not occupied by a bunch of other baby Euros to split them up and house them singly until they're ready to go to new homes is actually supremely, it lowers my stress, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So I'm pretty happy about that. Pretty happy about this clutch of ornate eggs. Really excited that she decided to lay. She laid, well, technically she laid 15, but 3 of them were duds. They were like deflated, puffy little water balloons. So the Pilbara rock monitors got a snack of those, and they wolfed those things down. And but the other 12 all look perfect. So I'm pretty happy about that. And yeah, but what's going on over in your world, Roy? What's happening in your place?
Well, I guess a couple weeks ago now, I had my first.
We should note that you're not mic'd up because
yeah.
Slide.
Yeah, oh yeah. So I'm not mic'd as I usually am today because usually I would be recording in my reptile room, which is an hour and a half commute away from me, and currently that commute is blocked by a large rock slide covering both lanes of the road. So
right.
I'm recording remotely from our little cabin, our little homestead out here, which is eventually where I hope to record all of these, but we're not quite there yet. We'll get there eventually.
Little by little.
But yeah. In terms of updates, so I recently had my first clutch of Garanotis infernalis hatch. That's the Texas alligator lizards.
Yeah.
And that was really, really exciting just because, again, this is my first time working with that species. I raised up some babies, and it seems like it wasn't that long ago now that I got those babies, but already, they're adults and producing. And Really fun to hatch them out. I had a pretty poor hatch rate on those, but I already have some ideas about what to change next time and improve on. So that's good to be learning in that regard.
What
And
are
then
those? What are those ideas?
I think that next time I want to incubate them at a cooler temperature.
Mm.
I was talking to somebody who's hatched them before on the magic of Facebook Messenger. A gentleman named Lawrence Paul, who's hatched out that species several times, and he was saying that he typically incubates them at like a much lower temperature. It takes a little bit longer, but he said that he's experienced the eggs to be pretty much bulletproof with that
Oh
method.
wow.
So, and that also makes sense to me. I incubated them around 78, which is lower than a lot of stuff, but
Yeah.
I think that it's pretty warm for temperate species like that. I don't think that they would be getting a constant or near constant 78, 76 degrees
Got it.
incubating too. So yeah, and then I'm also getting ready pretty soon here to offer the spilotes, the Amazon puffing snakes that hatched here back in November. They're just about ready to go.
All right.
Yeah, I just sent in sheds to get sex determination tests on all those, and once I have those back, I'll probably list those up, and also hoping to list some F1 captive bred and born monkey lizards
Hell yeah.
from a couple different pairings as well, because I've got a small horde of them right now, and that's too many. So I want to find some other folks who are excited about working with that species. I think that again, I've said it ad nauseum at this point, but I think that that's just a really promising species in herpetoculture, and and so hopefully we'll get those into some good, capable hands. And then the other update I have, which is that this week I actually had some amphibians arrive.
What?
At spring, which is kind of a fun thing. I haven't kept any amphibians since I was a teenager. And
What did you get?
I got some Rhinella margaritifera, which I'm sure I butchered that Latin name, and I think the Latin name is kind of irrelevant anyway because it's a species complex that's going to get revised most likely, but they're sometimes called Amazon leaf litter toads, or in this case Suriname leaf litter toads. So yeah, a little pretty diminutive species of toad from the Guyana Shield region, and I just think they're really cool, and also part of the reason why I brought that particular species in is that I think they might be useful in helping to scent prey items to entice another species that is hopefully going to be arriving here soon, which is the Guyanan green snake, also known as Xenodon warneri, which is pretty much my dream species of snake. It's a species I want to work with since I was a teenager, and I've never even had the opportunity to acquire one until very recently, and so I acquired one. And so far it's a species that has had a pretty poor track record in captivity, but I really want to give it a try, and so hopefully that snake will be arriving somewhat soon-ish as well.
I believe in you, dude. You can do it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm gonna give it my best shot. I feel like I'm an obsessive weirdo that's willing to go to great lengths to try and make things work, including getting toads from the same range of the snake that I'm sure that they eat in their native range to help support that process. Because my experience with most import wild caught snakes is that if you can get them feeding well, that's like half the battle, and with this species, it's going to be a significant battle to stabilize them in terms of parasite load as well. So that's going to be the real tricky thing. But
Right.
like I said, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm optimistic and, you know, not too attached to the outcome, just really curious and excited. It's like I said, it's a dream species for me. I think that's one of the more interesting and enigmatic snake species out there. So I feel all giddy.
Yeah, you seem giddy.
But yeah, those are kind of the updates here. I guess the last little update is that my sheds, which are going to become my reptile buildings, are finally supposed to be moved here.
Oh,
Next week is the day that I have scheduled to get them moved.
whoa.
Which will be a big moment because then I can run electrical to those and insulate them and get them all set up. And I think I'm going to do a bunch of elaborate, big, built-in vivarium setups in those sheds, and I'm just excited to have that process begin to unfold. It's going to be a lot of work, but I really love that kind of work. So, and I've been kind of chomping at the bit, just waiting for weather and timing conditions to allow for these things to be moved, because I bought these sheds a couple months ago, and turns out people that move sheds are in extremely high demand.
No way.
If any of our listeners out there are looking for a potentially extremely lucrative thing to do, you need to have some specialized equipment. But if you want to move sheds, let me tell you, those guys are raking it in.
I know that's crazy. I mean, I know you've been waiting on that for a long time, so I'm pretty psyched to hear that that's finally like coming to fruition, you know?
Yeah, for me it'll be probably the single biggest change to improve my like day-to-day quality of to have the animals live it, you know, where I live, because right now I just lose a lot of time and energy and gas money commuting to take care of them, and I'd rather spending that time and energy, you know, observing them and attending to them instead of in a car. So
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's hard to commute and drive so much.
yeah,
I get it, man.
yeah, I was like yeah, it's like 12 hours a week.
Damn.
Drive minimum just to take care of all the herps on average. So
yeah, that's a
lot of time.
Yeah, it is. It's not chump change. Just spend.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's not at all. That's crazy.
I think about people though that, you know, that just commute every day for work, and it's like, you know, that's just normal. But
yeah,
it's hard for me to reconcile that, because I do not want to spend that much time in a vehicle personally.
Right. Yeah, no, it's hard if you're not used to it, if it's not something that you enjoy, it can be really difficult to be cooped up in a vehicle for a while. I get it.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, man. I'm really glad that things are starting to move along for you and at least start to tick off some of that shit that you have to do out there to get that cabin of yours up to speed and up and running and up to where you be. I mean, little by little, right? That's with the steps of a turtle is how it goes.
Exactly. Little by little.
Did you just change how your audio goes in?
Yeah. Is it better or is it worse?
A million times better. Yeah.
Yes.
Fascinating. Okay, great. All right. Well,
I just realized unpleasantly that that I was mic'd through my Bluetooth. So I can only imagine that was horrific audio for our listeners, and I apologize, but from here on out it'll be slightly improved.
Oh, it's
still not as good as usual, but much improved, but still leaves a lot to be desired. But anyway,
that's okay. Well, so you know, I feel like we should I feel like let's just go ahead and talk about some of the stuff. So So the kind of the way I thought maybe it might be worth starting this off would be to talk about just the sort of the scope of our conversations thus far. So like if we were to take like a bird's eye view of all the conversations we've had so far, ranging from, the most ranging as much as they have, I feel like there have been a handful of relatively consistent themes. So one of those is passion, right? I don't think we've had a single person on the show who hasn't expressed a profound passion for what we do, for what they do, for what we do as a whole in herpetoculture, which is really, really cool. I think another common theme has been that most of our guests, if not all of our guests, have sort of thought about herpetoculture through a more philosophical lens than I might have anticipated. There was a part of me that thought that when we started this podcast, that we might encounter maybe a more of a split, where some folks would be more sort of philosophically inclined and some would be maybe more I don't know, perhaps business or financially inclined, or numbers inclined, or would be thinking about herpetoculture through maybe a lens that wasn't one that was sort of felt normal for me, and so that's been a real surprise to me, a pleasant one, right? Because what it's also one thing that I feel like I've really gained out of doing the show so far has been, I feel like every single conversation we've had has taught me something about what I'm doing, and has taught me something about the field in which I participate, has taught me something about the way so many more people in herpetoculture are thinking, than I might have given the field credit for. I might have had a more pessimistic view of herpetoculture before starting the show. And so I've been really pleasantly floored by a lot of the conversations that we've had so far. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with all that and relate with that. It's felt pretty profound for me. I think particularly just because, I have a pretty small footprint, in herpetoculture up to this point. I'm pretty isolated and insulated in a lot of ways. And I was just joking with our friend of the show, Dan Sheehan, through Messenger, and he was like, it's a grievous sin that you've never been to one of the big expos, and it's like, it's, called out. It's true.
It's true for both of us. Yeah.
I know. And we gotta address that at some point, and we will, but it's been such a profound privilege to get to just have this opportunity to speak to and learn from a lot of people who I feel inspired by in this practice and this discipline that we're pursuing. And and that's both like, hardcore legendary keepers who have been doing it for 30 years, and also like, newer faces on the block who I feel are just doing really cool, inspiring stuff. And one of the things I think for me that's about that has been kind of an unexpected wrinkle is that it's felt really emboldening for me to get more experimental, try some more things, get out of my comfort zone a little bit more, and not in a way that's like seeking to replicate what other folks are doing or try to do something derivative necessarily, so much as it is just like, I feel more encouraged to be myself. And I feel like herpetoculture is a really cool place for that. Like that creative outlet, and this potential for expressing oneself through this art and through this practice that we all share. And yeah, so I feel like encouraged to do that, even as it's like, I think that the one of the bigger things about starting this for me is just being a bit more of a visible person, and I kind of I tend to be pretty reserved and shy, and enjoy a little bit of anonymity, and this is definitely the most like public facing thing I've ever done. And I don't say that with any sort of like delusions of grandeur or anything like that about it. I know we're just doing a show that like probably 20 people listen to or something like that, but there's a really cool 20 people.
Yeah.
And but it's been good for me to get out of my comfort zone in that, and it's cool to feel encouraged to be myself a little bit more and allow myself to be seen in that. So just like on the personal level, I feel really grateful for that. And on a broader scale, I feel like I really have this sense that we're building community, we're contributing. I feel like we're contributing to the culture of this thing that we love, and we're building connections and friendships that are meaningful. And I think that that's going to just continue to grow and create more opportunity, and hopefully be of benefit to all of us,
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Yeah. I can relate to what you were saying about feeling more emboldened to like experiment and try stuff and feel like a little bit more okay with sort of being yourself. I kind of found that too, because not that I've always had like a maybe, what would the word be, sort of like a maybe sort of an irrational sense of confidence, probably a lot of arrogance in a lot of ways, and which is not great, but I think at least within this realm anyway, I feel like the interviews have made me feel a little bit more welcome broadly in herpetoculture, because I have some similarities to you in that, maybe I've been like around in herpetoculture consistently for a long time. I don't feel as though I've done anything all that special. And I also don't feel as though like I've never managed to make it to any of the conferences or expos or shows. It's just never been, for one reason or another, whether it's been scheduling, whether it's been just not having anything to bring, like sitting and watching all these folks, friends of ours, meet up at Tinley and have a great time. I'm just like, I got mad FOMO as a result. But that's fine. I mean, I know that it will happen when it's time for that to happen, and that's fine. Not really worried about it, but for all of the reasons that it hasn't happened yet, I just haven't been a part of these. The one thing I have gone to was Iguana Fest, the first one years and years ago. That was great. It was fun, and I'm glad I went. I met a lot of great people, but I'm really eager for when I can do that again, and in a different context with different people, and have some different experiences and have some different fun. And so, being able to get to have one-on-one or two-on-one conversations or two-on-two conversations with some of these people who I just have never been able to meet, or but I've always wanted to speak with, has been so rewarding and really made me feel more a part of the community, like broadly, which is cool. It's nice to feel like you're a part of a group of people who have similar beliefs or similar goals or similar ideals, similar interests, right? It's fun. So that, and the other thing too is sort of along the same lines of what you were saying, is I've definitely felt more empowered to experiment as well, to try different stuff here, because another common theme of many of our episodes has been you know, how and why and under what circumstances do we establish something, you know, a species of reptile or amphibian in the United States in herpetoculture, right? Or maybe even anywhere, not just in the US, just anywhere in the world. And like some of those have really varied from, you know, whether we're talking to, you know, Heather at Fairy Tale Dragons about an animal that's been here for a long time and at least in part due to her efforts will be here for a long time to come, or whether we're talking to, you know, Connor about some of the snakes that he's got that it's like I don't know that it, you know, it's like who's bred those. You know, like,
Yeah.
you know, like they don't even really exist in I mean, at least properly. I mean, they're here, but
Yeah.
it's like they're not, they haven't taken hold in any way, shape, or form, you know. Or whether we were talking with Alan Rapashi about establishing a lot of the New Caledonian geckos that right. I mean, that in and of itself too is fascinating because it's like, you know, so many different perspectives on how and why and under what circumstances to do this has been really useful, really helpful, you know. Excuse me. And you know, same thing with, you know, I've aired this a few times here on the show now that I've been encountering a couple of problems with a handful of my animals in the Euros, which is having some deformation to the tail scales in a few animals. I'm not going to get into the exact details of what. So I had a conversation with Ron and Heather maybe a week or two ago and had a pretty sure we came to the conclusion of what's going on. But I want to put a few things into play. And if it stops or reverses what was going on, then all right, I can say, all right, we figured it out. And I'm pretty sure we did because I have a substantial amount of evidence that would point to what we think is going on. And the good news is it's pretty easily remedied. It's not really a big deal. But it's one of those things that, like, you know, we've talked about this a few times, but it's one thing if you breed a species once. It's another thing if you breed a species for 5 years in a row. And it's a whole nother thing entirely when you're talking about sort of an innumerable number of captive generations at really large numbers, and some of the maybe, for lack of a better term, network effects that come as a result of having done that work at that scale for X number of years or X number of generations. And, you know, I don't mean that in a way that's intended to toot my own horn or anything. It's more meant to talk about the distinction between the kinds of problems that I remember encountering when I first started doing this, which was like, how do I get them to breed in the first place? How do I get them to lay their eggs in the box? And how do I get the eggs to hatch? And, you know, now at another point where it's like, I'm not worried about any of those things anymore. I'm worried about, you know, how do I ensure the long-term health of these animals over the course of their lives in captivity? How do I make sure that I'm keeping records and maintaining sort of like a structural integrity to what I do here to ensure that I'm doing what I'm doing in a responsible fashion and in a way that either when I die or whenever I decide to move on, I could pass this on to someone else in a way that makes sense, and in a way that allows the work that I'm doing to kind of move forward, because, you know, it's just the reality of doing something with Euros that maybe other people haven't done, or haven't done for as long, or haven't done at the same scale, which will lead me to some other stuff. But, you know, it's been really, really fun. And it's kind of given me, you know, I would never say that I've been burnt out on reptiles in any way, shape, or form as of yet, but it's been really, really fucking awesome to feel like the things that are interesting to me and the things that that kind of keep me coming to the shop every day and keep me engaged in what I'm doing here, continue to evolve and continue to change and sort of mutate over time. And it's been really cool because it helps keep things kind of spicy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, there's been something about it's just been invigorating, like
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, I feel similarly. Like I've never been burned out, with the herps, but I also, maybe I don't think I've ever been this excited either.
Yeah.
It's just kind of sprinkled a little bit of seasoning on it all,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
and giving it a little boost,
Yeah.
which
Like
is
we were
great.
It's like we were eating a sushi meal and we just put a little bit of ghost pepper flakes on top of our sushi roll. It's like, ooh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. A
Let's
nice little
go.
smear of it's a nice little smear of wasabi on there.
Ugh, no. I mean, ugh, yuck, dude. When I eat
I love
sushi,
it.
I want to taste the sushi, not the wasabi.
Fair enough.
Also, sorry for my voice and whatever. I still got a bit of a cough. I've been sick the last week or so, maybe a week and a half, and I'm getting over it, feeling a lot better, but I'm still just getting the last of the gunk out of my lungs and all that other shit. Man, I feel like I've been sick at a
Yeah,
velocity,
man.
the last 6 months that I haven't been in my life. I don't know, maybe that should be indicative of something. I'm not sure yet, but
I
so
think definitely indicative of the impacts of a few years of quarantine on our immune systems, probably,
oh yeah,
at
for
least
sure.
in part.
Yeah, that's what my doctor thinks too. Something along those lines.
But it's wild.
Yeah, dude, it is really wild. Same thing with my fiance. She's been sick so much over the last 6 months. Same kind of thing. It's crazy.
Such a bummer.
But at any rate, so this was another thing that's kind of been on my mind. And it's I think it's been on my mind since our conversation with Billy of Creepers Herpetoculture. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe we were talking about it a little bit before then. Maybe it didn't stick then and then came up and reminded me of our conversation with Billy.
Mhm.
And that is, because I think one of the main themes, another main theme around the show has been this idea of taking herpetoculture and helping it as a whole level up, right? Like how do we as a community, as an industry, not only improve our baseline standards of care across the board for any and everything, but also how do we like steward this whole industry into the future, and like what's going to be necessary, like what kind of thinking and what kind of like what kind of philosophy and ethos going forward into the next 100 years is going to be the kind of thing that we got to keep in mind now in order to have these things be more, in the main conversation in going forward. And the reason I mentioned our episode with Billy is because we shared and discussed his tenets, right? His sort of guiding principles that he set out for his own keeping and his own collection and stuff, right? Which is wonderful, and I respect them, and I'm obviously super psyched. Billy's a great guy. I am struck though, because I think this is part of that conversation is there conceivably the kinds of ethics and the kinds of processes and sort of systems that we put into place are probably going to have to be different depending on what our goals are, right? So I mean, this might seem obvious sort of when I say it like that, but I think one of the other dichotomies we've had is between keepers like Billy, Connor, both Connor Jones and Connor
Wardle.
Nathan Carlos Rupley, some of these folks, and then
smaller scale.
Yeah, smaller scale. Those folks, contrasting those with the Alan Rapashis, the Heather Moyes, the Ron St. Pierre's, any of the other maybe larger scale, long-term, is the other folks that we've had on the show. And I think that that's where I see the paths and the systems and the ethoses kind of diverging, right? Because I think some of the ways that Billy or Connor, either Connor or any, some of these other, Nathan, some of these folks, the way they're keeping, might not be as applicable to people who are doing things maybe at a slightly larger scale. And I don't mean to say that as we crank up in terms of numbers and production and whatever, that we should sacrifice quality or animal welfare. That's not what I'm saying at all. But, okay, so the reason this came up, I think in my mind, in terms of our conversation with Billy, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to call him out or put a spotlight on his conversation in any particular way, but I just want to say that, like, we talk about these two things, which is, on the one hand, we don't like the commercialization of things and some folks would say sort of like the pyramid scheme of the morph market. And, we don't like it. On the one hand, we'll say, I don't like that when I go to a show, all I see are crested geckos, leopard geckos, ball pythons, bearded dragons, corn snakes. That's all I see when I go to shows. And then at the same time, we'll have this other end of the spectrum, which is, well, man, these things aren't even established. They don't even, if they're going to survive in herpetoculture, we have to get them into more capable hands and more capable homes, and we have to increase their demand. And it's like, okay, well, where is this middle ground? Where does the scale balance out? Because, like, if you want to have increasing demand and establishment of things that maybe aren't otherwise highly popular and highly in demand, you have to have a level of systemization, a level of commercialization, a level of, like, otherwise, quote, dumbing it down a little bit. And again, it doesn't mean that maybe it doesn't mean that in 50 years, maybe we'll see Polychrus marmoratus in every pet shop around the United States. That's not what I'm saying either. But I think that those two, I feel like that we have these two sort of emerging sides of the playing field, it kind of coming into view in herpetoculture. And in a way, Alan talked about this, right? He talked about how, it used to be we were all under the umbrella of reptile keepers, and now it's the umbrella of bearded dragon keepers, and the umbrella of ball python keepers, and the umbrella of Uromastyx keepers, and the umbrella of Philothamnus keepers. Like, it's just these little tribes. But I'd go so far as to say that maybe it at least from my vantage point, it seems like it's really two basic types of keepers. You have the ones who embrace or love the morph market, and they don't have a problem with rack system keeping, which we'll talk about more in this episode in a bit. There's nothing wrong with any of the more popular things, and some level of commercialization is necessary. And then we have this other group of people who say racks are the devil's lettuce, and naturalistic keeping is the only way. And if I hatched an albino of this particular species that I was working with, I put it in the fucking freezer because I don't want them turning into ball pythons or bearded dragons, when morphs are a pyramid scheme. And it feels like, and again, it's a Venn diagram, right? It's not two totally opposing sides. It's a Venn diagram, and there are areas in which those people overlap right in the middle. And I'm here for that, because I think I'm one of those people. I think I'm right in the middle. But I don't know. That's kind of, maybe I can try to get your thoughts on this at this point, because I just feel kind of what I see. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it's kind of funny, like, well, firstly, I think that you're hyperbolizing a little bit, with that last part, just declare, just more for our listeners to understand that was a bit of hyperbole with, like, the last bit there, that, like, naturalistic is the only way to go. Because especially these people that we're talking about, I haven't heard any of them say any of those things that you just like said as like
Yeah, no.
the quick and I understand that you're like exaggerating it for the sake of the point.
Yeah.
But I think it's also kind of funny because I feel like you and I are kind of also illustrate these differences in some ways, where like you're doing things at a much larger scale than I am. I'm doing things at a smaller scale, more eclectic, less focused. And I think that in some ways it's like, I honestly don't even see these things as in opposition to each other. I think that it's all a matter of like, where the nuance falls, where, like, for example, like I don't have a problem with larger scale, production and keeping of herbs, as long as there's still like care and prioritizing of the herbs at the center, like, which is like so true in all of the people that we've talked about, where it's so clear to me that you deeply care about your animals. You're constantly striving to improve their lives. And the same is true with Heather. The same is true with Ron. It's like, that's totally possible to do. I think that it's more that there is, I think, within herpetoculture, a subset of people who aren't really seeking to do that, who are saying like, this is the acceptable, what I've decided is the acceptable minimum standards, and that's where I'm keeping things at. And for whatever reason, don't want to do things differently. And I think that that's just kind of par for the course in any industry, or in any field. You're going to have people who are resistant to change. And I think it's like we just had this episode with Zach that I think is such a perfect episode that talks about this dynamic, and this kind of like conflict.
Dr. Crawdad, you mean?
Dr. Crawdad, yeah.
The one and only.
The one and only. And he just speaks to it really well. I think I'd refer our listeners back to that episode, because he can say this stuff a lot more eloquently and a lot more intelligently than I can. But I think there's room for all of us in it. But I think the problem is that we're starting to see. I think that what's happening is that we're starting to see a broader cultural shift happening within herpetoculture, in which like the demographics within herpetoculture are starting to shift, and they're becoming more reflective of the mainstream, of society. Because, in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, herpetoculture has gone from being something that was largely on the fringes of society and undertaken by individuals on the fringes of society who, are totally happy to like, be in the Wild West and, doing their thing under the radar, don't really want the spotlight on them, to all of a sudden, like, we just had a global pandemic, and like it brought in like hordes of new pet keepers who bought their first crested gecko or ball python or bearded dragon or whatever. And with it, like this whole new generation of herpetoculturists have emerged. And it didn't just start with the pandemic, but I feel like the pandemic really like amplified all of these dynamics.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of these newcomers are younger people, whatever demographics, have more broader questions around society and things like social justice and movements for change that are happening. Like, these are all huge tension points within our nation, at least speaking about the US right now. But I think also, within Western society more broadly. And there's a bit of a clash there where like suddenly people are in here and they're kind of like new in the scene. They're like shining the flashlight on the skeletons in the closet, and they're kind of being like, what are these skeletons in the closet over here? and then you've got like old school keepers who are like, we don't talk about those. Like just like move along, look away, and like who are kind of like, fuck, like all these newcomers are here and they're ruining the party. Like we can just fly under the radar if we don't draw attention to ourselves. But the problem is, I think that like we actually really can't anymore. We're here, we're here now, and we have to kind of reckon with these questions, about like what we're doing, how we've done it for a long time, what needs to change, if anything, to continue to grow and progress. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's messy.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
messy
No,
with all of
I agree. And I think you're right in the sense that I think what's happening is a type of calibration, right? So
it.
the analogy I was using recently was with the art world. Okay. So with the art world, you had things like painting, sculpture, poetry, dance, you name it, that all have been practiced for millennia and sort of evolved in a similar way. They all responded in various ways to globalization and changes in the nature of their, sort of different continental shifts, whether it was war or, you name it, whatever, right? And then you had this thing called photography come out of nowhere, just a couple hundred years ago, really, really recently in terms of time, like very recent. And so what you had with photography was you watched all of art history play out in a matter of 100 years, right? In terms of the way photography changed from its inception and invention until today. And in the same way that you had this sort of this sort of just cataclysmic change within one area of art making, the presence of photography itself came with a lot of resistance and a lot of aggression. Painters and all these different people were like, oh, that's the end of us. And it was the same thing with the advent of Photoshop and Corel Painter and digital painting, right? Digital painting changed the art world, and people initially took it as a real problem, and then in reality, it's like, no, this is just a thing. It's just like painting. It's just like drawing. It's just like sculpture. It's just another tool, right? And so I think in some ways, I've talked a lot about herpetoculture as like a, sort of like a in the nascent stages of domestication, right? So, if we think about it through that lens, if we just grant me that for a minute, right? Regardless of whether or not you agree with it or whatever, in that way, it resembles photography to the art world, because, we've had domestic cows, chickens, pigs, sheep, goats, dogs, cats, koi, you name it, flowers, all these things that have been domesticated for millennia, and have already kind of gone through a lot of growth and a lot of change, and for the most part have, and I say this with great ignorance to those worlds, so bear with me, but from the outside looking in, appear to have all kind of hit this sort of equilibrium where, for the most part, there's there are changes that happen in the way we care for dogs and cats and what have you, but the presence, the needs, a lot of these things are kind of there. We have well-defined veterinary care for dogs and cats and cows and horses and pigs and sheep. We have pretty well-defined methods for keeping many different kinds of animals, but reptiles are pretty new. Like it's a
Yeah.
reptiles and amphibians are two new groups with massively diverse needs and diverse methods, who have kind of thrown a big monkey wrench into that thing, because we don't have a lot of, there's just not a lot that we have in terms of experience and mileage behind us to inform where we're going, right? So even though there's some, obviously, and it's certainly not meant to discredit any of the people who've done 10 times the amount of work that I've done before me. So, it's not to say that at all, but so I understand that there's a certain amount of like calibration kind of happening as a result of all of this turmoil and tumult, right? And in the same way that I think there are some maybe old hands, as it were, in this world who are maybe set in their ways and resistant to change, and maybe have a bit of a get off my lawn, you damn kids attitude about some of this. I also think that there is a kind of reckless idealism and idealistic naivete that of course happened on the opposite end of that spectrum. So you got the get off my lawn and the shut up boomer, you got both ends of it, right? So I think that's part of why I wanted to have this conversation, was because I really think that the answer for both things really ought to be just draw a bigger circle to include more people in what you're doing. Because the reality, the kind of people who want to say that there's no use for a rack system, or the morph market is a pyramid scheme, or whatever, maybe also tend to fail to realize that they wouldn't, like what they're doing today, it's very likely that it wouldn't be possible if you didn't have the morph market, if you didn't have ball pythons, bearded dragons, leopard geckos, crested geckos, corn snakes as a foundation for your entire practice of this industry. Like, you want to have the best lighting over any one of your reptiles. Well, a huge percentage of how we got there is through this whole realm of herpetoculture that you are now at odds with. And again, I don't mean, I'm not trying to say this in an absolutist way. And I'm also not trying to say that that no change should happen or at all, right? But so, and part of what I think would be a great way of illustrating this would be to talk about this particular post that I mentioned to you. And I just want to take a moment to just go ahead and note the post really fast, because then we can be speaking about the like I can quote it.
Go for it.
Yeah. So, and this was a post by Reptiles and Research, which is one of the other podcasts on the Animals at Home network, of which we are a part. And I want to start this out by noting that this is certainly not meant to be there's no beef at all between me or you and the Reptiles and Research podcast. Great show. It's not like that at all. It's just a thing worth noting. And it's about the post is, what is folklore husbandry? And that goes on to quote, and it says, it describes methods or supposed best practices which are unevidenced, pseudoscientific, convenience and ease led, opinion given and passed from one keeper to another. And then it has a little bit of stuff about minimalist mindsets, which is interesting. Trial and error stuff, which is interesting, but there's, where is it here? And then it says something here about through trial and error, many species have been bred in captivity when there is no, and then there's erroneous comma, when there is no other alternative folklore, when this is worded weird, whatever. This does not mean this is where the learning stops. Evidence-led husbandry is the quote gold standard and something to aspire towards. This involves finding evidence not only for the practice, but against alternatives. And so it's these posts that this kind of thinking that maybe, I don't know what the word would be, but sort of triggers me, and I guess we'll use that. It's a buzzword, right? It triggers me in some regard because, you know, I feel like this particular post assumes a lot, and you sort of have to take a lot of things as some priors in order to take this on as factual, for starters. You know, and one of the ways I'd like to, you know, but the problem is that it's veiled in this verbiage that makes it difficult for one to disagree with, because if I were to say I think that this particular post is ill-conceived or poorly worded or maybe misguided, then, you know, someone could come to me and say, oh, you mean to say that pseudoscientific convenience and ease-led opinions are acceptable? And that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is there are going to be, because of the scope of herpetoculture, there are going to be massive groups of animals kept in very large numbers for which these are the only things we have to go on. Things that are maybe not pseudoscientific, but things that have to do with convenience, things that have to do with information that is opinion-based being given from one keeper to another. There are going to be many, many, many circumstances for which that is all we have, because there is no other group or institution that's doing research on those particular animals. And, you know, part of one of the problems that I have with this too is about this sort of evidence-based husbandry, right? Excuse me, because what and this is where I think this kind of post goes wrong, which is to say, what are you, the poster, going to qualify as evidence? What is acceptable evidence in your mind? And that is a huge, huge stipulation, because if, you know, there's nothing about what's going on here at my shop that is scientific, it's not done in a university setting, it's not a lab, and I have no degree in biology or zoology or anything. And are you going to say that there's nothing about what I'm doing with uromastyx here that is contributing in any way to herpetoculture or to uromastyx or to the betterment of their care? And so I feel like, and this part about this involves finding evidence not only for the practice, but against alternatives. And that I think is highly dangerous in a way, because the against alternatives to me feels like saying there is one way to do this and there's one acceptable way of doing this. And you and I both know that's horseshit. There is no such thing. There are many ways. There's more than one way. And I've said this about uromastyx, but I'll say, you know, you could say this about any other animal. There's more than one way to raise a happy, healthy reptile or amphibian. There's more than one way to raise a happy, healthy child, a human child. There's more than one way to raise a happy, healthy dog. And so I think that kind of idealism is what I'd like to call it. Smacks of the naturalistic fallacy, which I've made comment about before on this show and on my own socials, which is the sort of logical error that says that just because something is natural, that it is therefore good, which is also nonsense. That's not true. So I think that while I want herpetoculture as a whole to progress in a way that is both progressive and, yes, indeed, evidence-based in a way, I think we need to be careful about doing so in a way that is open-minded and not in a way that says, this is acceptable evidence and this is not. This is acceptable practice and this is not, right? I think that gets really sketchy and, you know, could very well alienate more people from our industry then it could bring in. And I want to, what do you think about that?
Just how to go there, Phil. I think
All right, I'm not trying to start a fight. Are we fighting, Roy?
no, I know, no, we're not fighting. I'm
I-
just joking.
Oh, I know.
I mean, I feel a lot of things about this.
Oh,
I
I'm so sorry. And
Go ahead.
before you go, I just want to say, I just would like to reiterate that I've got no beef with reptiles in research whatsoever. None. And in fact, if they would like to come onto our show and talk more about this, I would love that. It would be wonderful. It'd be a great thing. It'd be a great opportunity. So let me just, I wanted to bookend my entire statement with that as a caveat beforehand and after. So anyway, I apologize for interrupting you. Continue.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, and I would love to actually have Liam and Ellie on the show sometime if they would be willing to join us. But I think that honestly, the way that I feel about this is, I mean, I don't have a great deal of disagreement with the fundamental premise of where I think that they're coming from, which is that I think that our husbandry, our approaches to working with animals, we should have good reasons for why we're doing what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And that those should be informed by the available research and evidence that we have, provided that it is limited, and I think that one of the things I really like this, Liam and Ellie just released a video of a presentation they gave at I think a Herp Society in the UK, talking about this kind of cycle that they're describing right now of kind of, industrial scale breeders producing ball pythons and racks that then go to pet keepers who try to keep them in vivariums. They don't do well in the vivariums because it's like such a shock to their system essentially, and they're overstimulated because they're basically kept in a sensory deprived environment to an overstimulating environment.
Right.
And they're talking about their premise that they're arguing is that those are animals that are doomed to fail in that environment. And so it actually reinforces this notion that these animals only do well in a sensory deprived environment, which is something that I think some rat keepers have said for a long time, is that like, that's all they need, because in the wild, ball pythons just live in termite mounds. They don't do anything. They're happy to just live in a hole in the ground.
Right.
And the reality is that the available evidence that we have about the natural history of ball pythons is that is not the exclusive range of their behavior, and it's interesting because this is like this whole concept around sensory deprivation with captive herpetofauna, and particularly as it relates to like rack systems, is something that I've been thinking about a lot actually, and that kind of first came to mind for me in the process that I had of quarantining and acclimating spilotes that I brought in.
Sure.
And because when I brought them in, I had them in big opaque tubs, like intentionally sensory deprived environment. Like, okay, I don't want them to see a whole bunch of naked monkeys walking around the house all the time. I want them to feel like they don't have to think about that. And I still had them they still had UV, they still had overhead heat in these tubs, they still had basic substrate, some a range of hides, branches, all that stuff was still in there with them. However, when I moved them from those setups to a vivarium setting, they went off feed because they're stressed out, because it was actually overstimulating to them. And so I realized that I needed to set up a more gradual transition. So anyway, all that's just to say that I think that that's a really important point that they're making. And
I don't disagree with that at all.
But I know you don't. But I do honestly, I feel like often frustrated by like infographic style posts on social media, because I feel like so often what they're designed to do is to like swipe. They're encouraging the reader to swipe through and follow a linear set of data points to lead to a specific conclusion, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what they're intended to do.
Yep.
And even if I agree with that conclusion, like for me, there is something that like irks me a little bit about that process of like
Yeah.
guiding someone along in that way. I think that yeah, because again, like you said, I think that like the thing that you're pushing back around about how it's important to have like an open mind, I do really value that as well. I think that that's important. And I do sometimes feel like it's easy to make a compelling argument for anything in that way, because you're just providing, you're presenting this evidence,
Yeah.
the evidence that supports your position. And in some ways it's kind of interesting, because I think it's like, what is happening in this particular instance is like, they're providing this format in a way that actually is presenting evidence and data to support a conclusion that I agree with in large part. But it's kind of funny because typically when I see that kind of stuff presented, it's like to the opposite end, it's like
Totally.
So I don't know. I think that there is a way in which I feel like battle lines are being drawn at times, and that there's a degree of like sensationalism or kind of just like, I don't know if what the right word is necessarily, but I think a way of drawing, encouraging people to like to assume the positions on the battle lines, like pick the side that you're on, pick the camp. And I think that I agree with your assertion that we need to be actually drawing larger circles, and that although I think that there is a lot of room for progression in herpetoculture, and I'm personally sympathetic to like this kind of movement for that is growing. I do feel sensitive to like figuring out ways to communicate and spread information that actually draw people in, and make them curious, make them welcome, and that aren't necessarily like directly combative. And I don't think that like, also again, this isn't to point out that post directly and saying that, like, I don't think that they were trying to be combative or anything with that, but
No, it's just a useful example.
although I think that Liam would agree that he likes a good debate and a good scrap on the margins,
Sure.
with the morph gods of the world. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of an inarticulate thing. Part of the problem with you and I having conversations like this, Phil, is that you are a verbal processor and pretty fast, and I am a nonverbal processor and slow.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I would not agree that I'm fast in any way. I think I often sloppily run through some of this verbal processing, But I mean, the reality is the thing of it is, I've spent a lot of time being trying to be very highly curated in the kind of things that the kind of information I put out, and the kind of discussions that I'll engage in, because I don't care. Like I'm not here for, debate or argument. If somebody, when people have tried to, it's very rare, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I've across the 10 years that I've been selling the Uromastics I produce, I've had maybe, 5 or 6 disgruntled people who were upset with either what they got or the maybe a decision of mine for various reasons, like whether they could or could not get something that they wanted, and then they've gone and decided to trash me in one location or another. It's been very rare, but my response to that has always just been ignore them. I don't care. Like, you can, I let my work and my animals speak for themselves, and I'm not here to argue with anybody. I'm not here to bash or whatever. But I am not going to temper my opinion anymore, because that's why we're here. That's why we're doing the show. Or at least one of the reasons we're doing the show is to be able to freely and openly discuss and express our opinions and our thoughts and feelings around herpetoculture. So that's what we're doing. My hope is that none of what I have said or will say gets interpreted as an attack, because it's not. And again, I will always speak with anyone who disagrees with what I have to say, always, because I might be wrong, and that's fine. I have absolutely, there's not a shred of concern in my mind for being wrong. I'm totally okay changing my mind publicly. And I, I mean that wholeheartedly. I really don't care. So, I feel like that's important to note. And I also feel like, again, as I said already, I don't disagree with anything that you said. I don't like racks. There's a reason I don't use any for any of my animals, but even if I kept animals that could be kept in racks, I wouldn't, because I don't, for the most part, I don't agree with, I won't use it as a blanket statement, because I do think there are situations in which certain kinds of racks are totally A-okay, and that's great. But I just I do struggle sometimes with the idea that there is a set way that this ought to be done. That's really challenging, I think, because I don't see that. I don't see any other realm where that's the case. Every other part of every other industry or niche interest or market, or you name it, has a great diversity of methods and processes, and I think that's good. I would never be interested in any kind of homogeneity with regard to herpetoculture. But the other thing here is so you and I would agree that humans descended from hunter-gatherers, correct? You and I would agree with this.
Yes.
Right. Okay. In what way, shape, or form does your life resemble that of a hunter-gatherer's? Zero.
It does not.
Basically not at all, right?
Right.
Are you unwell, Roy?
Sometimes.
Sometimes we are, but
now that's a loaded question, Phil.
No, it's a loaded, that's true. It's a loaded question, but and I'm obviously leading.
I'm a guy that has, you're a guy that has 100 Uromastics in his shop, and I'm a guy that has a whole bunch of weird lizards. So we're probably not well in the hunter-gatherer definition of the term.
I don't know if I agree with that either, but yeah, no, I know. but my point is just to say that, like, just because we evolved from hunter-gatherers doesn't mean that our software isn't a little bit different, right? And it doesn't mean that we're wrong or bad or not okay as a result of that, right? Yes, you and I would also agree that sometimes our software and our hardware are at odds with one another, and that's fine. Yeah. That's a whole different discussion. But I mean,
And I think that-
obviously, and I say all of this with the understanding and acknowledgement that I use the wild information about uromastics to the very best of my ability as my guiding compass. That's my North Star, right? The
Right.
wild look, the wild existence that they have. Insofar as I can be aware of that in any way, I shoot for that and I use that as my guiding rule. But what I have here are not wild uromastics. Even if they're imports, they're very different. They're not the same animal anymore. And they may not have a lot of removal from the wild, but it's not the same thing. And the lives that they're going to live are not the same thing either. And so I feel like we also have to acknowledge what we're doing. We're not going to have animals that can be taken from our cages and placed back into the wild. I just think there's got to be a healthy amount of idealism here, right? Like, if it, again, in the same way that if you and I were interested in being more like hunter-gatherers, we should have fully non-monogamous relationships with any sexual partners imaginable. We should only be eating meat, vegetables, and fruit. We should be hunting every day, and as a result, running or walking anywhere from 4 to 10 miles a day, 7 days a week, living in small groups. And we're not doing those things. And in the same way that that's the case, there are always going to be upper limitations to what you can provide, and it's not a problem if the best you can provide is not an outdoor enclosure and a fully wild replicated diet. I mean, my goodness, it is okay to have something that looks a little different. I
don't think anyone's disagreeing with that though.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but see, that's what I think. That's where you and I may disagree, is because I think that there are people who are taking the opposite end of them. So again, we were talking about two ends of the spectrum. One with like the big breeder morph keepers with the racks and blah, blah, blah. And the other side is the more idealistic, naturalistic, whatever. We'll just, again, highly simplified, hyperbolic argument. I think that example being set by a lot of that crew, in the same way that the example that's set by the other crew over here with the rack systems is a bad example, there are bad examples being set on the other end of it too, which say, which ones that shame you and gatekeep. They shame you for the way you keep them because it's not naturalistic enough. They gatekeep because, it's got to be done this way. And if it's not being done this way, I don't want anything to do with you or your methods or what you have to say about it, and I just feel like,
I think that's probably true, that there is an issue with like the methods of like shaming and gatekeeping. Personally, I don't think that employing shame is the most effective way to get people to change. I don't think it actually makes them change at all. I think that more often than not, it actually has the opposite reaction of putting people on the defensive and making them reactionary. And that's in many ways, like that's probably my biggest gripe about employing the tactic of shame as a tool to, if your objective is to create change, I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to do it. It might create change for some that are the onlookers, right? The spectators. But for those who are being directly called out or whatever, I think that it just kind of amplifies divides. But that said, I really don't see people saying like, you have to keep outdoors, or like even with that, like that particular post, the one that you called out as an example, from Reptiles and Research, I don't think that their conclusion with that is even saying like, every breeder out there should never keep in a rack, or if you're a breeder and you're keeping in racks, then you're doing it wrong. I think that what they're saying is that like we should be striving for more sensory enriched environments at every stage. So like if you're going to use a rack, use a rack with like sensory stimulation, so you're not creating essentially an animal that has an atrophied brain
Yeah.
that
Sure.
freaks out when it feels substrate on its
Yeah.
stomach for the first time, like, which that's I totally agree with that. I think, and
So
I think that part of the problem that we're encountering is that, like, you spoke earlier about like how we're much further along. Like you spoke about photography, about how that was like this perfect microcosm of like all of art history within a century. And then you talked about like the domestication of other animals. Well, part of the thing about what's happened in that process of like those other types of animals becoming mainstream is that now there are just like kind of baseline accepted minimums for what you can do with those animals.
Absolutely, which we've talked about.
And that exactly, and that hasn't really fully happened with reptiles yet. And I think in some ways that is kind of the debate that is happening, is like, where should we draw the line for what is acceptable baseline minimum standards?
Yeah, sure.
Is it like, okay, racks aren't acceptable at all? Or is it like racks are acceptable if they're still providing some level of enrichment, if they have natural substrate, if they have novel things for the animal to interact with occasionally, even if that's like throwing in a paper towel roll, or a cereal box for them to smell and hide in and explore.
Yeah.
Or is the baseline minimum standard with like a rack, it's 2/3 the length of the animal's body and 1/5 the width of, in terms of width, it's 1/5 of the animal's body length, and it has a piece of paper as a substrate water bowl, and that's it.
Yeah.
Is that the acceptable baseline? Like, I think that that's a debate worth having, and like personally, I would argue that the available evidence that we have, that we know about herps and their sophistication and the ways that their brains function, is that like, that's actually not great for that animal's like cognitive development and long-term well-being at all.
Yeah. No,
for it to just be in that kind of environment. So I think that that's kind of where I see like that whole debate is like, where do we make it?
I think
Below this is not okay.
So I think this might be a worthwhile distinction to make here, which is my gripe is not with having that debate, nor is my position ever going to look like, well, if all you can do is a shitty rack, then it's fine. That's not what I'm saying at all either. I agree with everything that you've just said. I think what I'm trying to suggest is that my gripe is with the way we're having that debate and the kind of example that sets going forward. Have the debate, but do so in a way that is both courteous, respectful, open-minded, and accounts for the areas in which you might not have any idea what you're talking about. Because, as an example, a different example might be, you see this all the time in the forums. Now, I haven't been on Facebook in a long time, so I don't know, maybe things have changed, but I'm going to bet they haven't. But regardless,
they've just gotten worse still.
I'm sure they have. But one of the things I used to see was one of two things. Either I would post something and I would get feedback from someone who keeps one fucking euro as a pet, and they've had it for 4 months, and they want to tell me what I'm doing wrong, right? Now, I'll go so far as to say that as a martial artist, I understand that I can learn from everyone, whether it's the most experienced or the least experienced person. That's true, right? That doesn't mean that the person who's been keeping 1 Uromastyx alive for 4 months has any idea why I do what I do. And nor should that person necessarily be in a position to give guidance to other new individuals, right? So this is a situation where it's more about where it's more about having a little bit of self-awareness and having an awareness of the way you're talking about certain things. So, as opposed to saying something like, oh, you really should be keeping like X, Y, or Z because of X.
Mhm.
The way of saying, like another way of doing it would be like, hey, yeah, I love this kind of thing. I here's the way I do it. And the reason I do it is because I've, from what I've read, here's the book I read, and here's the article I'm citing, and here's, what I'm saying? Like, based on this stuff, I changed what I'm doing. Good luck with what you've got going on. I hope your animal's doing great. Like, you don't need to be scolding or critical or in that way. And I feel like the way we approach having these debates and discussions, the way we approach setting these baseline minimum standards of ethics, the way we make attempts at persuading people who may be entrenched in their ways to see things a little bit differently is as important as the standards that we set. And that's, that's what I think that's it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I think that I also feel like on some level, part of my whole gripe with all of this shit is it's just the way that people communicate behind barriers of the kind of barriers and protections that social media, anonymity offer, all of these kinds of things. Like, people don't communicate that the way they would, with someone face to face on the internet a lot of the time, which that I think that for me is often weird and disorienting. And I probably sound like a boomer saying that, even though I'm 32 years old. It's
Okay.
I still think it's important to like be courteous, to be kind, to be respectful in communication, and like I get pushback. I think a perfect example, I've mentioned this example before, is like the way I keep tricolor hognose snakes, for example, is not the mainstream way of keeping them. I'm well aware of that. And it's funny because, if I post like an observation, in a group of one of my tricolor hognose snakes basking, like I've literally had this happen. I post a picture of one, it's basking under, halogen and UV. And I'm like, it's really cool to see these snakes actually coming out and being able to observe them, and not just like having a vivarium that's, that's just dirt. Because that's how they are a lot of the time. If they don't have an incentive to come out, and photoregulate in that way, then they probably won't. If if they have belly heat or whatever.
Right.
And somebody commented and said, they don't bask. It's only doing that because you're forcing it to. And I was like thinking, I didn't indulge the debate. I just was like, I'm just gonna let this one go. But the funny thing is about that is, like, I can say the exact same fucking thing for keeping one with undertank heat. It's like, well, it's definitely not gonna fucking bask if it's only kept with undertank heat, because it fucking can't. So it's like, it's just kind of a ridiculous thing, where it's like those two arguments, though, there's a false equivalency between those two arguments, right?
Right.
Because, like, it's saying it won't is not the same as saying it can't.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And making those things equivalent they don't have the same value, and so that's where it gets tricky. Is I think that, and that's where it is important, I think, to have like where the whole evidence-based thing comes in. And, like with like this call for like evidence-based husbandry, I think it's like, it is what you're saying about like, using what we know from natural history to inform our care, like in a lot of ways, that's like how, Dr. Crawdad himself was explaining it, on our episode. And I purposely asked him, like, can we just beat this dead horse? Because like, I think it's really important to like know what it is we're talking about when we see evidence-based husbandry. And and like, that is what you're doing with your euros. Like,
sure.
and it doesn't have to be done in a university setting to be valid. And I don't think that R&R would argue that it does at all.
No. Well, because they're not a university and they're not, you know what I mean? They're this, it's the same.
But they are pointing to like, studies and stuff like that. And
no, I know. That's
but in any case, I think that's where it can get tricky is, I do see when these debates end up happening, a lot of times like false equivalencies are drawn about things that it just kind of nullifies everything when that happens. Because it's like, if we can't agree upon like what actually is evidence, then we can't agree, and I think that even in that there is complexity and nuance to this conversation, because which again, this is back to like your original point, which is that like, how do we define what evidence is, like how do we have nuance about all of this? And unfortunately, like, again, this is my gripe with social media, with the times that we're in terms of like, in a way, it feels like everything is marketing, it's like, and marketing 101 is like, strip out the nuance. It's like no one wants that. They want it here and fast and now and like immediate. And like you have 10 seconds to make your pitch, and that's it. And unfortunately, I think that when we're talking about shit like this, so much is lost when we do that. It can't be reduced in that way. It's too complicated. It's too nuanced. There's too much gray area, and I think that's the thing that Zach said, in our episode with him. I keep referencing back to it, but it's just like, it's all gray. Like, this whole fucking conversation is actually in the gray, and when we're having these black and white battles, but like the actual people who are occupying those black and white positions, I think are drastically in the minority.
Yeah, no, of course. I'm sure that's absolutely true. And I think it's worth saying too that like part of why I like to talk about this stuff is because sometimes if I don't try to argue it, then I have a tendency not to. I feel like I haven't really done my due diligence. You know what I mean? Oftentimes trying to come up with, maybe if I can come up with an argument that sort of falsifies a particular perspective, then I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'm not going to take that on for now, until someone else presents me with something where it's like, shit, well, I can't really argue against that. I'm going to have to accept that as true, And so sometimes I'll see or hear something and I'll think, fuck, I don't know if I get on with that. Why does it rub me the wrong way? Is it because I'm triggered and I'm like a little upset about, because maybe it was something that was true and made me feel bad, or did it upset me because I'm like, I actually think this is bullshit and I don't agree with this in any way, and I don't always know, it's something that sometimes I have to kind of work through verbally, as you said, it's a lot. You mentioned marketing and in illustration too. When I was doing commercial illustration and editorial illustration, we used to have this saying that your pictures have to be a puzzle for a dumb guy, which is to say that you know, you really, your image has to be readable and understandable almost instantaneously. Otherwise it's sort of an unsuccessful illustration in some way, you know?
Mhm.
Now there's some flexibility in there as far as context, right? If you're reading an article and maybe it's more of let's say it's not a cover, it's just a, you know, it's an interior piece and it accompanies an
Mhm.
article. And you're like, okay, this article is about nuclear power plants, and the
Mhm.
illustration is maybe a little more subtle and is not like a picture of a radioactive symbol or something. You know what I'm saying? It's, you can have
Yeah, yeah.
a little more subtlety when you have a little bit of context, but like I think that that's necessary. I think thinking about things this way, it used to drive me crazy that an illustration couldn't be more subtle and nuanced in the eyes of the people who were teaching me, you know? And I think that this is true of this topic that we're talking about now, which is I don't like I don't like when people speak in absolute terms. I don't like when um a particular
Mhm.
position seems like it's drawing a smaller circle and excluding a lot of people.
Mhm.
I don't like when a particular position uh has an air of arrogance or condescension to it. You know, I'm like, no, you're losing me now. Because
Yeah,
if,
yeah.
you know, if you don't have the self-awareness to 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 address that before you put anything out there, then I don't know, maybe it's sort of, to me, is indicative of a lack of clarity of thinking, or maybe a lack of
Mhm.
holistic thinking. Um, you know, so I don't know. I have there's a lot, and I think that it's very possible that my position on all of this will change as time goes on. And, um,
Mhm.
you know, like the information landscape that I'm working with currently might look really, really different in 10 years. And I might
Yeah.
have to be like, yeah, you know what? I used to think X and now I don't, or, you know, or whatever. And it's like, or it might go the other way. Maybe it's like, hey, you know, we all thought it was going to go this way, and turns out it's actually kind of better going this way, you know, like, and that's fine too. Like I'm pretty agnostic as to like where the truth is going to lead. I don't care about where that leads us. I just want to follow that and just do my
Mhm.
best all along the way. Um, but I really want to make sure that I do so in a way that is diplomatic and, again, draws a larger circle and brings more people along for the ride, because otherwise, you know, it's just bad news.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we recently had this kind of reminds me of a conversation that I recently had with one of our listeners who actually gave us some critique and pushback off from one of our episodes. And it ultimately ended up, we had like a really productive conversation and messages about just kind of the conclusion I kind of took from the conversation with this listener was we actually have a lot of the same goals and kind of conclusions within herpetoculture about like where we want to be heading, and different and disagreements in terms of like the tactics of how to get there. And I think that is like I think about this again. I keep using this term of like movements for change, you know, but I think about that as true as just like that's true within all movements for change. You know, it's like you had MLK and you had Malcolm X, and like they did not have the same opinions about everything, and they were both part of this broader movement for social change, right? That was progressive, you know, that was a net gain. and and so I think that there's room for that, you know, there's room for differences. However, that said, like one thing that I do feel is that again, this is like a byproduct of social media and the kind of incentives that it creates, which is like um the best way to create engagement is to incite outrage. And in some ways, like um if you're measuring like the success of like a post, for example, by the amount of engagement it's getting, um then like maybe outrage is the best way to go. But like what's the conversion on that? You know, if you are trying to make a point, if you're trying to win people over, if you're trying to lead people to take a different position, to have an open mind, a more open mind about something, that's not the way to do it, right? Like you're like out, not the avenue to do that. And so you're going to have a different kind of incentive for that. And I think that that's a problem in terms of like how we do these things, because I think about just like somatics, you know, like our bodies and our stress hormones and all of that, you know, with all this stuff. And my experience is within like these kinds of conversations, within debate, is that once you've pushed somebody beyond their window of tolerance, it's you've lost any potential for attraction, for change, for progression, for mutual acknowledgement of humanity, because at that point you're going to devolve into like reactivity, and it's going to become culture war BS. You know, and like unfortunately, like if there's one big negative in terms of what social media has contributed to society, I would say is creating an endless machine for reactivity, culture war stuff. Getting people to draw lines against one another when they actually have a lot more in common than they might realize. You're muted, by the way. I don't know if you know, but
That's okay.
Anyway, that's
I agree.
the thought on that.
I agree with everything you said. Yeah. Well, you know, I think this actually might be a great place to leave it, because we're like a little over an hour and a half. And I think that at least I feel like I've gotten out most of what I wanted to talk about in this particular episode. And I think that I think this is probably, so like one of the things for the listeners, this is one of the things that Roy and I have discussed at length, kind of in private, which is we'd like to do this a little bit more often, like have a solo show relatively frequently.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And also, I mean, that's part of why we want to do the show in the first place, is to kind of have these conversations and have them in public instead of having them in private. So maybe we can get some more people to talk about this. And the other reason I think we should call it is because I'm starting to lose my voice a little. And
that's okay.
Yeah. So otherwise, I would continue.
I just want to give a quick thank you to all of our listeners. Again, just like, we really appreciate just the listening, the engagement, the questions, the feedback. And always would welcome more of that. Whether it's like, you know, constructive criticism or enthusiasm, it's all welcome. And just want to also, again, thank all of our guests. You know, we've had, this is episode 35. So that means we've had 33 guests, and all of which have been awesome and have contributed just so much to I feel like my perspective on herpetoculture, and which is ever growing and changing, and just really appreciate everyone's time and support, and and care. Thanks.
I'll just echo that and agree 100%. I couldn't have said it better. Thanks to everybody.
Awesome.
It's amazing we even get the opportunity to do this.
100%.
Yeah, man.
Okay, all right. Cool. Well, I'm going to hit the button, and until next time.
Yeah. Heck yeah.